for a link to the recording, which will be posted on the APPIC website. So I'm going to get us started by introducing our moderators today. I'm at the bottom, and Jeff, you can advance 2 slides. My name is Shona Vaz. I'm the Director of Training at the University of Chicago Medical Center. We are on the south side of Chicago, and our community is just really struggling right now, sort of in my department and in my training program as well. We have an internship and a fellowship. I also serve as the secretary on the APPIC board. I'm going to turn it over to our other speakers to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Baker. I serve as Executive Director for APPIC for the last 10 years or so. Have a little bit of experience with this, serving on COA for 6 years, and was chair for 1 year, associate chair for another year. And definitely this topic was timely, is continuously timely. And this is a great opportunity for some discussion about strategies and opportunities and innovation and creativity, because COA was always looking for ways that people were making their best effort to retain and recruit from underserved populations, as well as providing an infusion of diversity issues throughout their curriculum. So this will be a great discussion.
Hi, my name is Jenna Glover, and I am the Director of Psychology Training at Children's Hospital, Colorado for our internship and postdoctoral program. I have also been a site visit chair for the last 3 years, and I am a member of the APPIC Diversity Committee, so happy to be here today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Osfed, and I'm a current member of the APPIC board. I'm currently serving as the vice chair, and I am no longer a director of training, though I have been a director of training at 2 different VA institutions for both internship and postdoctoral residency programs, including accredited specialty postdoctoral programs. And I also have served as a site visitor and a site visit chair. I'm delighted to be here facilitating this discussion with all of you, and I look forward to learning what's worked for you all.
Thank you, everyone. Jeff, can we move on to the next slide? So we feel like it's important to start with kind of the structure of the call and a few disclaimers. Thank you for responding to our pre-call survey. And based on the survey and some of the questions that came up on the APPIC members listserv, we identified 4 questions that we will facilitate, for which we will facilitate a discussion. So if you have found particularly effective strategies or creative solutions to manage, we would love to hear from you. We would all love to hear from you. We're thinking that we will have about 10 minutes for each question, and then 10 minutes at the end to wrap up. So please don't be offended if we cut you off. I feel like I have to use my group therapy skills a little bit here, but I just wanted to frame that we might need to move on. Next slide, please. So it's important for us to say that the ideas that are exchanged on this call are not sanctioned or recommended in any way by the COA, which when it comes to diversity issues is not prescriptive. There are some rules that they are prescriptive about, but diversity is not one of them. So we are not representing COA's views. There are no perfect answers. So for those of you who came here hoping to find the response for which you will not get flagged or not get asked for additional information, we want to sort of set it up that we might disappoint you. There's an article that COA recently published that addresses the diversity recruitment and retention issue. The link is on this slide, and we can also send the slides out at the end of the meeting if people would like them. And if you have specific questions, feel free to call COA. Before we set up this call, we did check in with them about whether they would like to be represented on this call, and they declined. because they didn't feel like there was a right answer and that they would necessarily communicate that effectively, but they were very open to wanting to hear from us as training directors. All right, does anyone have questions before we get started? Feel free to use the chat box. If not, we will launch into our first question, which has to do with methods that programs currently utilize to improve recruitment of diverse trainees. And I can get us started on this discussion. We had a site visit last year, and it's a little bit of a unicorn that I actually did not get any flags on this issue in our preliminary response and response to the site visit. And so I think that thinking about the plan from multiple levels in terms of what you do in your program, in terms of the experiential activities, your didactic activities, and the population, as well as addressing competencies and sort of communicating all of those pieces together is what I think was really effective. And we would love to open it up for anyone who has specific questions or would like to share what they do. Please unmute yourself when you are speaking.
I'm not above calling on people. So we'll give it another few seconds. But I know some of you in the crowd, so I might ask some of you to share what you do.
I will be very happy to share what we do at Salud. So we're, I'm the training director at Salud. It's a primary care system of primary care clinics.
We can't hear you. Can you speak up a little bit?
Yes, I can get closer. Yeah, great. So yes, actually, I'm very happy to participate here today because this is one of the topics that I'm doing a little bit of research about it, and I feel very passionate about it. So one of the first things that we do, I establish collaborations with different academic institutions that they have specific programs. In our case, what we need is psychology students or trainees who are bilingual to be able to provide services to the population that we see at Salud. So establishing those collaborations has been the first thing. We actually have students from international universities as well coming to our clinics. The second thing that was very important to do was to modify our interview process. Because if you do not understand their perceptions or views, to give you an example, in some places, there is no difference. Social workers, for example, they do something very different than in our healthcare system. In other places, they are not able to provide therapy or things like that. So if you do not understand those particularities in terms of how psychology is in their country of origin, you will think that they don't know or they are not properly trained. So we change those interview questions to pretty much adjust and contextualize their answers depending where they're coming from. And I can keep going, but at least those collaborations and changing the interview process a little bit.
That's so interesting to think about how you adapt your procedures to meet the needs of your applicants and then communicate an atmosphere of that is welcoming and inclusive. One of the quotes that I used in my self-study was, diversity is being asked to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. And I sort of like led off that section with that quote and talked about the different ways in which we try to be inclusive. Does anyone else have thoughts or questions?
I will just add to what was just shared. I am the training director at the Atlanta VA, And we've done a lot also working on modifying our procedures with selection to just try to keep our own implicit biases from overwhelming how applicants are rated or chosen. And so we've put a lot of thought into everything from how we assign, excuse me, I have pets in the room, how we assign groups of application raters, so we ensure as diverse a set of eyes on each applicant on paper as possible. We've put a lot of work into keeping our ranking process as data-driven as we can. So even though we still do conduct interviews, we ensure that each applicant has a very diverse group of interviewers across multiple domains, meeting with them and assessing different competency areas, so that when all is said and done, we're trying to limit the that sort of gut reaction of, oh, I just like this person, or oh, I just don't, or they rub me the right way or the wrong way, and trying to keep as focused as we can on the skills and competencies and making sure that we have a very diverse group of staff rating everybody on all of those domains.
Dr. Burns, I just wanted to say that I have 2 trainees this year, that one came from your program and is with us as a fellow, and the other interviewed with you, and they have both been very active in helping me revamp our diversity curriculum, and they repeatedly cite your program as an example of one that does it really well. So,
well, you just made my day.
Trainees notice. And they, and I think we might have exchanged some emails, or I did with, I think, one of your fellow training directors back in the fall as we were changing our curriculum.
Oh, fantastic. Well, that's really wonderful to hear. That makes me feel.
So I have something to add, maybe. This is Dr. Eric Schwartz. I'm from Sarah Reed, the training director at Sarah Reed Children's Center. Sorry, I have a mask on, in Erie, Pennsylvania. And so one of the things that I did was actually a kind of a piggybacking off the last APPIC convention. I tried to focus a little of my time in terms of recruiting diverse interns on our public materials. And so what I did was, I think it was the last APPIC conference where Dr. Kermit Crawford had given the keynote speech. And so I contacted him after, and what I worked with him on, and he gave me feedback, I developed a public diversity statement that we use on our website and in our materials to try and encapsulate what our approach to diversity is. And he gave me some really valuable feedback on wording and just kind of coming up with a statement that was proactive and very much kind of in terms of recruitment and of diverse interns. And so I thought that was really helpful.
I did that in our self-study as well. I went through the brochure. I actually had our trainees who were members of underrepresented groups read the brochure and point out to me where it could be stronger, where they might feel more welcomed. One of the things that I hadn't even noticed was some of the gender language. For example, I would say he, comma, she, and I hadn't caught that. And one of the trainees pointed it out. And so the next year we changed things. So I think having a fresh set of eyes, especially from your interns and intern graduates, is a really useful way to get some information here.
There's a little bit of chat activity, Shona, about people being willing to share diversity statements or diversity curriculum within perhaps the listserv.
I would certainly be willing to share it.
Yeah, I think that if we keep track of people's names and where they're from and follow up, Jeff, we've been doing a BCC for this group as we send out the surveys, but I wonder if maybe we share email addresses at the end of the call so people can exchange resources.
I can certainly do that.
If you would like your email address to not be shared, please let Dr. Baker know so we can leave you out.
We have a diversity statement in our materials as well, and I'd also be happy to share that.
Great. You know, there's also on the APPIC website called Training Resources, and we're more than happy to post those for you in that section there, because they are in vast need, especially for diversity resources. So if you all have materials to share that would possibly benefit our membership, we'd be more than happy to post those. And you can send those to me as well at appic.org.
One of the aspects of our diversity seminar is that we allow it to be determined by the interests of the interns. So we have some stuff that we think we need to cover, and then we poll them for what they want to go over, and we use that to craft the syllabus, which looks a little bit different every year. The COA and our site visitors really seem to like that.
So I have a couple thoughts. This is Janet Yang. I'm the clinic training director at Heritage Clinic in Pasadena, Los Angeles. And one thing I found is by advocating for more diversity in my whole agency over the years I think when people come and they see what kind of system they would be working in, the more diverse that our agency has become over time. And that's been kind of a long, slow process, but that has changed I think how interns talk to each other and talk to future. I think word of mouth between interns and their colleagues at their grad programs about how they felt makes a big difference. So a lot of the recruitment isn't just in the recruitment, it's in how the diverse interns feel at the place and how they talk to their colleagues. So another thing that I found is how much we try to talk about cultural differences in our supervision, our treatment teams, our seminars, just in the agency. The more we actually really talk about diversity and diversity issues and cultural differences, people seem to feel like we're actually addressing real issues, and then they seem to feel more comfortable, and then word of mouth kind of gets back to their schools.
Thank you so much. I'm going to move us to our next question, since we're 10 minutes in. We will be led in this discussion by Dr. Glover. Thanks, Jenna.
Thanks, Shauna. So the next theme that came up was what methods do programs currently utilize to improve recruitment and retention of diverse staff? And as Janet was just talking, having diverse staff obviously is a great way in and of itself to recruit trainees. And I know this can be a particularly difficult issue because there are times in our agency where we are not in control of HR practices directly. And so there's some creativity that needs to be brought around this. And so to kick off the discussion, I was just going to share a few things that my program has done in terms of trying to increase our efforts. So one of the things we linked directly to in our self-study was the efforts that we are making to recruit diverse trainees, because we hire a lot of our trainees, and so that was one of the connections that we could make. The other thing that we've done that I think has been very helpful, we unfortunately are a program that does not have a large representation of supervisors of color. And I think for psychologists of color to come to our setting, they don't have the same level of support as they might in other diverse areas. So I have worked with community partners as well as our state psychological association to create a mentorship program for diverse faculty members and diverse supervisors. And so when they come in, even if we don't, for example, have a Black psychologist on staff, but we were to have a Black psychologist start on faculty, we pair them with a mentor in the state so they're able to have that specific relationship. We have tried to go through the addressing model and find supervisors for gender diverse mentors based on non-heterosexual mentors. And so that's one of the things that we've done to say, we really value this, and we also want you to have a connection to a mentor who might understand you in a way that we don't currently have. And that was something that I think was well received by our site visitors. So would love to open this up and hear other ideas of what other programs are doing and their efforts in this area.
I feel like an important point to make here is when we report back to COA through the annual report, we are really only reflecting on racial and ethnic diversity. And I found that it was very helpful in my write-up to talk about other individual difference variables and how they all comprise diversity. So I think that opening that discussion up to the components of the addressing model and how our faculty, even if not necessarily from underrepresented racial groups, do represent diversity in many, many different ways.
Great point, Shona. COA sort of avoids some of those categories there because some people feel compelled that they have to answer yes or no, and they don't want to force people to put themselves into certain categories just because it's a COA report. So that's one of the reasons that I recall why only ethnicity or identity is posted there. So there are some cautions in why when you open up a question, people feel compelled to answer it, and sometimes that feels a little bit like it's been coerced, and that's not what they want to do. And what you just mentioned there, putting together a large report in your report about what efforts that you made with this opportunity here and the depth and breadth of diversity that you have at your site and how it interacts or how it's how you infuse this information to your trainees is important. It's not captured in those charts for sure.
Thanks for that clarification, Jeff. And Andrea, Dr. Burns, I think that you were going to make a comment.
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't know that this really answers COA's question the way they want it answered, but I do think that all the efforts to diversify our trainees is actually a way of recruiting and retaining a diverse staff, largely because we hire them. You know, many of our staff were trainees at one time, our own, we especially our postdocs, we hire a lot of them directly from postdoc, and many former interns go on to either ours or other VAs. And so I do see that, you know, really working on diversifying our trainee body as a very important way of recruiting and retaining diverse staff as well.
I can share also that I thought about recruitment and retention on 3 levels. So there was the program level, the department level, and the institutional level. And there, sometimes we don't always have control over the pieces above us, but I think that there are some institutions that have wonderful resources for diversity. There are mentorship groups, there are women's councils. Our institution, for example, has subsidized housing. So, you know, so thinking about the institutional resources and how they can facilitate retention and support of junior faculty was really a persuasive argument I was able to make.
So one of the things that I've found to be so effective is mentoring and advocacy. So like several people have said, hiring our interns, particularly our diverse, some of our diverse interns from diversity backgrounds, but then offering some mentoring and some advocacy. Sometimes the larger institution has sort of been a little threatening to not keep some of them, and I've tried to really put effort into helping mentor around certain issues and or advocating with the higher ups as to why it was a benefit to retain some of them sometimes.
Thank you for that comment. And I'm seeing in the chat some asking about people would love to hear others' thoughts about retention specifically, and also thinking about growth opportunities like leadership opportunities for diverse staff. So any ideas that people could share in those areas?
our institution has a longitudinal leadership development program for diverse faculty. So it's a year long and you meet once a month, and there's different components to the program, and it's across departments. And that's been something that our junior faculty have really appreciated. I certainly went through that myself, and was able to sort of speak to the curriculum and share what it meant for me in being able to advance.
Hi, this is Karen Gauss from Laurie Children's Hospital in Chicago. So one of the things that I think has been really helpful for us in trying to recruit and retain diverse staff is actually putting some energy and effort and resources into program development in areas that are of interest to these staff. So frequently our diverse staff have come with specific interests that weren't part of our program. For example, we have one person we just recently recruited who was really interested in substance use and abuse in children and adolescents, and we arranged for mentorship from another institution in the city of Chicago for this person, and developed basically an entire program to support her her interests.
Thank you, Karen. I think that's a really important aspect of what are the things that are going to be appealing for diverse staff and creating those opportunities. And we're coming to the end of this section. One other thought I just wanted to share with you that has come up recently at our institution. Oftentimes with both interns and staff that we are hiring, we talk about wanting to make sure that they are a good fit for our institution. And we have really started to move away from the concept of being a good fit, because usually fit is something that's similar, and trying to think more broadly about the idea that we don't necessarily need a good fit for what we already have, and wanting those really valuing and working towards appreciating differences. So just something to think about in the language even that we use. So we'll move on to our next question now.
Okay, that's I'm up here. It's how do programs assess their methods to recruit and retain diverse trainees and staff as part of their overall diversity plan? So that's a great question, and many people, somebody's unmuted there. So let me see if I can mute everybody there. Okay, that's good. It's not about quantity, and it's not about statistics of your success as much as it is about efforts to do these activities. If you're not making efforts and you're wonderfully successful, you'll have to define that in some measure. And if you feel that you're doing a wonderful job, then you need to have a narrative that supports that information. And there is one, after spending 6 years on COA, like I mentioned earlier, it's pretty close to impossible to meet all diversity backgrounds being at your site at the same time, both for supervisors and for trainees and for patient population. So you're always going to be wanting to be making efforts to recruit and retain and diffuse this information throughout your program about people from different backgrounds, people who are perhaps underrepresented in the national population, that you can provide these efforts and identify what kind of efforts you're making to move towards that. So it's almost a never-ending quest, I think, on one hand. But if you can identify efforts, that is typically what is seen as you are doing what you can do, and you still need to assess that to identify what is it that we're doing well and what is it that we need to improve. And those kinds of responses are much more acceptable than, well, we live in South Dakota, there's nothing we can do. I'm sorry, we just can't do anymore. Those are not acceptable answers typically. So I'd be real interested to hear what kind of methods that you all use. It's been a while since I've been a training director, but we certainly put forth many efforts to do these kinds of things. As Dr. Yang mentioned earlier, having recruits or having applicants come to our site was extremely helpful to us because they got to see our patient population, they got to see our staff, they got to interact with people who are at our site, and we had a very diverse site in one sense there. So people felt more comfortable and felt that they could relate to different people. Having mentors in place there were also very helpful. So I'm going to miss a little bit this year, as I'm sure many of you are going to go to virtual interviews, and you're possibly not going to have that rich emulsion or that interaction or that possibility. A lot of folks like to go to the town that they're going to be living in for a year, or to the hospital or the center or counseling center that they're going to be at. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge for one of the methods that I use to recruit and retain. Just show folks what we had to offer there was always helpful. Let me hear from others to see what kinds of methods that you use to recruit and retain diverse staff and trainees.
Honestly, so this is Eric Schwartz again from Sari. Honestly, you know, we are in a very small geographic area, and so it's always a challenge for us to recruit any psychologist, period, regardless of who they are. But one of the things I did find helpful was I was finally able to. Recently, we were trying to hire a psychologist, and I was able to finally get my agency to use a search firm. And that really broadened the ability to at least connect with diverse applicants, you know, in a way that individually, by just trying to even work with our HR department, which is very, very small, you know, to be able to reach as many people as we did using a search firm.
How did you convince them to use a search firm? Those are usually expensive.
You know, cajoling. I think it was the fact that we were on the schedule for a site visit, and I felt like it was critical for our agency and for the internship to demonstrate some effort to reach out to a greater applicant pool, and they bought it, and I was able to get them to buy into that, to doing that.
I like that strategy for sure. I'm hoping it just doesn't happen every 10 years for people, that you can make this an ongoing every year, every kind of thing happen.
Yep.
One of the things my program implemented this year for the first time was a diversity survey. So reaching out to everyone in the department to explore their perceptions of of the diversity climate in our department, whether they had experienced microaggressions, how they witnessed the departments and the institutions, how they experienced the departments and the institutions' efforts to recruit and retain diverse trainees and staff, and then how they supported them. And we are waiting on the results of the survey and hoping that we will be able to implement some of the suggestions.
Yeah, it's likely your institution has a diversity plan, but that shouldn't stop you from your training program in developing a diversity plan, because you are unique, you're a microcosm within that larger organization there. And some people think, oh, I'll just use our EEO statement. That's typically not that helpful. If you're truly committed to diverse recruitment and retention, you really are curious and interested in trying to make those efforts. And like Dr. Schwartz said, a consulting firm, meeting with administration, putting this into a diversity plan. These are your goals and objectives, is to bring about some sort of increased awareness of the importance of diverse trainees and diverse staff.
We have done some surveying as well, just amongst our, certainly it's built into our regular surveys of our current trainees when they evaluate the training program at mid-year and at the end of year. There are specific questions about diversity in the program and the climate. In our survey of graduates, and more recently, we've just done at the beginning of this training year, sort of as preparation for our annual training retreat with our supervisors, we did a survey. We had some specific issues that we needed to talk about from our last training year. And so I did a survey of the staff to see sort of how they were feeling about the climate. And
yeah. I think that's helpful data. That shows you're making some efforts to figure out what's going on and how you might consider quality improvement for those efforts. Dr. Chia made a comment in the chat how they incorporate this in their handbook. They incorporate it during their interviews. They look at self-identification and look at the diversity lens of doing that. Even in their email signatures, they put in the different kinds of inclusiveness. So that definitely communicates something to applicants, both for training and for staff. If you have some focus on diversity, then you're likely interested in that. If you don't have that, I might be hesitant to come to your program.
One of the things that we've done in terms of assessment is after the match, we send an email out to everybody who interviewed with us to find out about their interview experience. It is completely voluntary. We don't take any information of who's responding. But in recent years, we've added more specific questions about their experience of how welcoming we are for diverse trainees. And that's been incredibly helpful for understanding why or why not a trainee may have selected to come to our site. That has given us kind of different data than I've gotten before.
Again, that's transparency and that shows efforts. And I think COA would be appreciative of that kind of data. I love data. And I think it's helpful to show what kind of efforts you're doing for transparency, as well as self-examining how to improve your program, and that's quality improvement. So I know we're ready for the next slide here. So I'm gonna click on that and welcome Dr. Osoved to say a few words for us.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. The next question that we will be discussing is, how do we get diversity out of the classroom or seminar setting and into the clinical setting? And relatedly, how do we incorporate diversity competence into clinical supervision? So how are we assuring that our supervisors have that competency? So that is our next topic to address in 10 minutes or so. So we'll just be kicking this off. A few thoughts that I have, and then I'd love to hear from all of you what you're doing, is really the second question I think highlights the answer to the first, which is that it's really through supervision. It's through doing the clinical work under supervision and also mentorship that I think we get the concepts away from this idea that diversity is an academic exercise, because really it's not. It's a lifelong practice that we're all learning and growing, and that needs to be applied in all aspects of our work as health service psychologists, not just our seminar or our CE work, but all of our work. And so I think some of the comments earlier about having discussions about diversity and differences at every opportunity, and that also means at every clinical and supervision opportunity. And then likewise for our supervisors, how do we ensure that they are committed to growing in their diversity competency as supervisors? And I think it's finding ways to support that through, whether it's, I heard reference to annual training days, for example, and making sure that diversity is always a topic within your annual training day or your ongoing, CE seminar, or even building into your regular practice. If you have a supervision form that you complete at every supervision, is there a simple query like, are we addressing diversity, right? So making sure that it's folded in at every opportunity for our supervisors and also for our trainees. And I'm sure there's some really creative ways that you all are doing this. And so I would love to hear what that looks like in your settings. I know I feel very blessed because in Hawaii, we are literally the most diverse VA in the entire VA system. So our patient population is more diverse than in any other VA setting. And so I think that in and of itself just requires that we clinically address diversity all the time, because there are always differences between ourselves, our patients, our trainees, our colleagues. And so it allows for a rich discussion of these matters. And sometimes that's also not the case, and it's still just as important to have those conversations. So I'm curious how folks are handling that in their settings.
one of my trainees who came from the Atlanta VA has been doing lectures with our interns this year and with all of our practicum students on the addressing model. She has slides, she has a worksheet, she walks them through working through each case and sort of trying to come up with components of the model and how they might be relevant. And I think that that has really encouraged the trainees to take a more active role in supervision with thinking about diversity. And while the responsibility should not fall to them, I think that it does open the door to have richer discussions.
About 6 years ago, we developed a diversity rotation, which is one of our offerings. Now, we had some misgivings about doing this because we didn't want to create the impression that that's the place, that's the rotation you do to talk about diversity, and you can ignore it everywhere else, because that was, I think, the only concern that people had. But we created the rotation as a place specifically to foster multicultural competence as a clinician, and to work with patients whose clinical concern really centers around a diversity variable. And it could be just about anything. It could be a patient whose depression has to do with their struggling with their sexual orientation, or with racism, or whatever. It could be just about anything. So that's at least been one place that we've created a clinical experience where the supervision is really all about fostering multicultural competence. Across the board, we're just making it a regular part of our training retreats to try to develop our own competence as supervisors, and to figure out, how do we infuse more consideration of diversity issues into places where, especially, I think it's been hardest in rotations where you're teaching EBPs or manualized interventions, and folks are so kind of focused on teaching the technique that they sometimes forget to think about sort of broader dimensions of the clinical work. So we're really trying to work with all of our supervisors to put more attention to diversity issues in everything that they do, and to make sure it's coming up in supervision.
We have a supervision seminar, and in our supervision seminar, we have 2 lectures on teaching diversity competence. So we do some reading, we do some case discussion, and the trainees talk about their own supervision experiences and when they felt like diversity competence, and teaching them how to be more competent in this domain, differentiating, more positive and effective experiences.
Yeah, so we actually started a continuing education seminar with our supervisors a few years ago, and we meet quarterly with the specific idea of developing diversity competence in supervision. And it's been a very interesting journey. We've used books like The New Jim Crow. We've had people present lectures on immigrant and refugee mental health. So it's been a range of topics and discussions, anti-impressive mental health. But what's been interesting, I think, for me about this experience has been that, it revealed that among a group of supervisors who all kind of talked the talk, once you put them in the situation of actually talking about this at a different level, it was clear that there was a huge amount of white fragility at play and defensiveness, and they weren't really walking the walk quite the way we wanted them to. So it's been a journey, and we created a diversity committee to address all of those issues.
I think that's a really great point, that taking that journey is different than talking about the journey, which gets to the question, right? How do we get it to really be a lifelong commitment rather than an academic exercise? And these are really wonderful ideas about how a culture change is happening really among the supervisors at some of these sites, it sounds like, which is just fantastic. And diversity committees, I think, like diversity rotations, right? Sometimes we have hesitancy about, we don't want diversity to just be the responsibility of this little area and we don't address it everywhere, but rather how do we all, you know, shoulder this together, and the diversity committee or the diversity rotation is one piece of that, but not the sole place where diversity happens or is addressed. I think back to the data conversation earlier, another important piece is, you know, being clear that this is part of how folks are evaluated. So whether it's the interns or the postdocs and their competency development, they're evaluated on their diversity competencies. So too are our faculty, whether it's when they give their presentations at seminars and didactics, that always how they address matters of diversity and ethics, for example, would be evaluated. And the same would be true for any feedback forms or evaluation of their performance as supervisors from the learners that they supervise. So I think incorporating it in there can be a nice place to address it as well, and illustrates our commitment and gives an opportunity to make corrections if things aren't going well. And I think we're at the end of our time for this particular question, so we can move on to final thoughts, questions, and discussion. I'll turn it back over to Dr. Voss.
Thank you, Allison. So we hope that we have left you with the notion that there is no single path and there are many potential options that are relevant for your site. And I think that thinking creatively about what you do already and how you might frame that is a really important piece of responding to the COA. We are wondering if you have any questions that you would like to raise. You can either speak up or put them in the chat or raise your hand if you can figure out that function. And maybe we can spend some time responding to your questions. No one?
Something really quick, I think, or maybe a final thought is that diversity should be the expectation that is discussed in any training program, and not only for the students who are diverse, but for anybody, because at some point you will use it because you're interacting with a colleague from a different background, because you're interacting with a patient from a different background. And I think that what are the expectations that when the new class are coming to the training program, what is the expectation in terms of diversity, and what they will expect or how you will address those conversations throughout the academic year. I think that's something that should be discussed at the very beginning of each academic year.
That's a great point. Other thoughts, questions?
Some folks have asked if I've been trying to keep some of the themes going in the chat, just as a reminder of what the points everyone has been making. And some folks have requested back channel if they could have access to the chat dialogue. And I was wondering if we were thinking we might just do a summary sheet or something when we do follow up from this to address that.
Well, that'd be a great idea. We can do that. And we can also send out the transcript of the chat. We did that on the last call.
Perfect. That might be the easiest. Okay.
Any
and just a
other
reminder that
thoughts?
it is recorded, so you will be able to go back over that. I can't remember, does the chat appear on recording? I can't remember.
I can't remember either.
We'll find out. But
Yeah,
we'll
will.
save it as well, either way.
So June 1st is the day that most of us have to respond to COA if we have any follow-up questions after the last visit. And I'm wondering if anyone has a response that they need to make in the next couple of days that we can help you with in this context. Hopefully you haven't left it for the last 2 days, but if there's anything that we can address here for you, we do have 5 minutes left.
There was some discussion about diversity officers on there. So a lot of institutions do have a EEOC officer or a Title IX officer. So those can be very helpful resources. Human resources usually will have that person stationed at in their office there. So, but some places have low profiles and some have high profiles. And every accrediting organization I can think of, from SACS to WACS to COA to APA to CPA, wants some clarification of your efforts for diversity. So it's important to work with that office, and you can bring more awareness to them about the importance of your training program as well. So psychology doesn't have a perfect record, but we certainly value diversity, and goal is to provide more providers that are similar to the patients that they're working with when possible. So EEOC and your Title IX officer, a lot of those folks would be interested in that kind of efforts that you're making, because they'll want to include it in their reports as well.
So we have a final slide on some resources, and we're happy to send out the slides. Again, if you don't want to be copied, please let Dr. Baker know. So APA's multicultural guidelines are something that we review in our program. And I noted that in the self-study, they were just revised in 2017. So the link is up there for you. Reading the standards of accreditation and the specific IRs for diversity, I think will make it clear that COA cares less about the outcomes and more about the effort. And so I think it can be helpful to actually look for examples for what they're asking from us. And I put the specific IRs and the pages where you can find them in that very big SOA document on this slide. Any other questions or comments? We will be sending out a post-call evaluation. Please do complete it. Let us know whether you found this to be useful and whether you would like for the APPIC board to continue to create more opportunities like this in the future. We are all very disappointed that our membership conference was canceled this year. And as we think about the future and programming through the year, with all of the changes that have come down in the last few months, and in terms of what lie ahead, we are thinking about ways to connect with our community and our membership. So please fill out the survey and let us know what you thought. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for participating. It was wonderful to be with you all.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you all. Nice to see many of you, and hope to see you on future webinars or seminars as well. And thanks to my fellow participants, presenters. Thank you.
Thank you.
I did, however, choose a few items from the updated competency evaluation to put in the intern graduate survey. So I just was thinking about like people doing this like 2 years out and like asking them every single item seemed kind of nuts. So I have questions from all of the all the different domains, from all the 9 domains, but I don't have every item from our, yeah. Can you hear me?
So I'm not sure if that's someone asking a question or they're talking to a friend.
We're all unmuted now, so I think we're just getting someone else's conversation.
I think so too.
Okay, well, thank you all. Thanks for participating. That's great. Love it.
All right. Bye, everyone.